There has been a assumption that is actively pushed by these internet advertising companies that if you don't let us intensely track the private lives of any individual person, none of these sites and capabilities will exist. None of them will be profitable. We cannot provide this service freely without allowing you to permit us to ransack your entire life. And yet, television, the most popular broadcast medium of the prior generation, existed without this intense level of data collection because it was not technically possible, with no problem at all. Think about the rise of celebrity. Think about how endorsements worked. Think about how advertising worked. And it functioned entirely for a generation with none of these flaws, and it was extremely, ludicrously profitable. They are saying today, this is not possible on the internet, simply because we can spy on you. And if you don't let us spy on you, because broadcast mediums were not as interactive back then as digitally mediated broadcasts are today, that it's not profitable. First off, we need to recognize that that is false, and we need to deny that. Advertising is advertising. If they want to put, ads in front of a video, if they want to put ads on the side of a site before you access it, that is okay. That is permissible. We can accept that. We might not like it. We might try to narrow exceptions. We might try to regulate it. We might try to make sure the advertisement is not abusive or whatever. But none of this requires or presumes the necessity of tracking everything you do and storing it for increasing periods of time. There's not a link there. There should not be a link there. They argue that it is more profitable for them to engage in this kind of intensely targeted advertising. And I do not doubt that is true, but they are not entitled to laws that basically defend and accept the maximal extent of their profits. They're allowed to operate and engage in any business as freely as they like, so long as it does not cause harm and violate the rights of others in the society in which that business operates. So, I mean, that's the first thing. The second thing is we need to recognize that there are alternatives, that this can change. Everybody thinks, because this is out here, because this is already done, it's inevitable. The fight is over. There's nothing we can do about it. The NSA exists. The British GCHQ exists. There are these incredible spy services that can do whatever. And it's true, a lot of these guys operate beyond the law, but much of their operations, much of their surveillance is informed not by the independent operations that they do, which require intense focus and commitment of resources, people working over many years to try to spy on this person or that population is increasingly happening with mass surveillance. But many, or I would say, in fact, most of their operations are informed by access to these corporate stores of records. When we look back to the story of 2013, for which I'm famous, the revelation of global mass surveillance, we had top secret documents from within the United States government that showed what the National Security Agency considered their most valuable intelligence reporting program was entirely based on records that were derived from the internet giants who voluntarily joined this program of sharing information beyond what the law required. And so this is the thing. What Facebook knows, what Google knows, what Amazon knows, they do not necessarily know what the other one knows because they see it as a corporate advantage. They try to play against each other. They try to maximize their understanding while minimizing the understanding of their competitors in space. But governments can look into each bucket, unfortunately, with a tremendous level of ease, and then they see what all of them see together and create a more comprehensive picture. We can limit this at each stage through these things. One, we restructure their business operations by recognizing this level of data collection. First of all, we don't have a data protection problem, we have a data collection problem. The collection of the records in the first place is too much. The data retention is too long. We collect too much for too long and permit too many methods of processing it. Second, all of this collection is premised on the idea that we have consented to it. This is false. The regulatory groups have agreed to it on the presumption that these business operations, this surveillance is necessary. There's a necessity to it because only this kind of intensely targeted advertising will produce the profits necessary for this to happen. But when we look at the costs of traditional modes of media and traditional business enterprises, and we look at the profit margins of these internet giants, which are some of the richest companies in the world now, they hire very few people, and instead they build very costly infrastructure that allows an increasing concentration of wealth, increasing concentration of resources, and ultimately influence over future regulations and lawmakers and politics in their country and around the world. Because at every step we are failing to recognize what is the source of the vulnerability that they are exploiting in society, and that is the data collection problem. If we do that, whether we're talking about adults or whether we're talking about the children that could not consent to this to begin with, these are, I think, the angles that we want to look at from a policy and regulatory perspective.
And then now shifting more towards the very pragmatic day-to-day choices that we make, because a lot of this information too, we're giving up voluntarily, perhaps because we don't understand how valuable this data actually is and where it's going. There's the lack of transparency issue. But while it still somewhat realistically rests on our shoulders to make better choices about the tools that we're using and the platforms we decide to click OK to and sign off to, what would be your advice for your fellow parents, now that you're a dad, on how to approach this issue? Because of course, that kids are going to go online and they're going to want to use these tools. All their friends are using these tools. So how can we do this in an informed and safer way?
I look at this from a lot of perspectives, because as a technologist and as a former CIA officer, NSA contractor, I know a lot about how people are monitored technically. And in my own activities, I try to do things like lock down my phone, lock down my computers, to make them produce fewer records of my activities and share those with fewer groups. And I think this is useful, and I think it's worth doing. But it is an expert activity, fundamentally, and the methods and means by which this is accomplished are constantly changing, because it's a cat and mouse game with these technology companies and governments that are trying to increase the amount of intelligence that they have access to, where they create new technical standards, new protocols. And I think about the framework by which your phone connects to the internet, any arbitrary site. How does that happen? Again, the things that you request don't get to your phone by magic. It has to happen somehow. How does it happen? And who decided how it happens? Governments have a tremendous influence in this kind of regulatory standards-making process. Private companies, many of which are extremely predatory, have tremendous influence in this standards-making process. And so as a result, unless you have specialist skills and you have an incredible amount of free time, I think it is unfair to ask people to engage in this kind of cat and mouse game. And even for myself, right, where it is my life's work to understand these tasks, I don't do it perfectly, because I can't do it perfectly. It is possible to limit the amount of data that is produced and produced about you, and again, who it's shared with. But all of it, all the time, It's not practical, particularly in emergency situations, particularly when you're traveling, particularly when you're in circumstances that you can't control. And so if technically it is not especially plausible or practical to be able to limit all of this information,